Hello and welcome to the Africa Briefing Podcast, your trusted source for in-depth analysis of Africa's most pressing issues. I'm John Ofensa, and today we are examining a major shift in Africa's security landscape. That is, the continued withdrawal of French military forces from the continent. France has officially handed over its only military base in Côte d'Ivoire, marking yet another step in the diminishing presence of the former colonial power. Just days ago, Senegal held discussions to organize the departure of its own contingent of French troops. With France expelled from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, its once dominant military footprint in Africa is shrinking fast. The question now is, what's driving this trend? Is France's security role in Africa over? And what comes next for regional stability? This is not the first time France has withdrawn troops from African nations. In the 1960s, as former French colonies gained independence, military agreements allowed France to redeploy forces under new terms. But today's withdrawals feel different. For decades, France justified its military presence in Africa under the banner of counterterrorism and stability, particularly through Operation Barkhane, launched in 2014. However, nearly a decade later, security has only worsened in many cases, especially in the Sahel. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, three nations at the center of insurgency battles, no longer see French troops as the solution. Instead, they have ordered their withdrawal, citing security failures, political frustrations, and shifting alliances. The most significant change is that African governments are no longer automatically aligning with France. Many are seeking alternative partners, with Russia becoming an increasingly influential player in security cooperation. Mali, for instance, has deepened its ties with Moscow, believing that Russian support could be more effective than French counterterrorism efforts. One key reason for France's loss of influence is that its military strategies have not delivered results. Despite leading security initiatives such as the G5 Sahel and Operation Barkhane, extremist violence has worsened in parts of the region. Governments are not the only ones driving these changes. Public sentiment has been overwhelmingly in favor of troop withdrawals. In every country where French forces have been expelled, citizens have celebrated their departure. This rejection is fueled by both historical grievances and present day frustrations. Many Africans view France's military presence as a remnant of colonial control, benefiting French interests rather than genuinely improving security. In Chad, for example, when the government ordered French troops to leave, the justification given was that the country had, and I quote, matured in its sovereignty, unquote. This is a clear message that many African states no longer want to rely on France for security. France's declining influence is not only due to military failures. Diplomatic missteps have also played a role. President Macron's widely criticized remark in January, suggesting that African countries had, and I quote, forgotten to say thank you, unquote, for France's military interventions, was met with outrage. The statement was seen as arrogant and dismissive, reinforcing the belief that France still sees itself as the dominant power in Africa, rather than a partner on equal footing. French diplomats have since attempted damage control, but the impact of Macron's words has only deepened mistrust between France and African nations. The question is, can France rebuild its influence? Well, with its military presence shrinking, France must rethink its approach to security cooperation in Africa. Direct military involvement is no longer seen as viable or welcomed, but opportunities remain for alternative forms of engagement. Countries like Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Chad have all indicated they still value security ties with France, but the nature of these partnerships is evolving. Instead of deploying troops, France's future role in Africa may focus on training, technical support, and intelligence sharing. This approach was previously supported by Niger's former president, Mohamed Bazoum, before he was ousted in 2023. Another possibility is greater French involvement through multilateral organizations like the European Union and African Union, rather than acting as a sole security provider. Ultimately, these developments reflect a broader transformation in Africa's approach to security and international relations. For years, African nations were seen as passive recipients of foreign military aid, dependent on external forces like France. Today, they are taking control of their own security policies, forging new alliances, and demanding a more equal relationship with global powers. This shift does not mean the complete end of France's influence, but it does mean that African countries are redefining the terms of their engagement with Paris. France must now decide, will it adapt to this new reality or will it continue to lose ground? And here are my final thoughts. As France reassesses its role in Africa, the bigger question remains, what does this mean for African security? Can African nations strengthen their military capabilities without French support? Will new security alliances, such as those with Russia, prove more effective? And what impact will these changes have on regional stability? For now, one thing is clear, the era of unquestioned French military dominance in Africa is over. A new chapter is unfolding, one where African nations are taking the lead in shaping their own security futures. Thank you for tuning in to the Africa Briefing podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for more in depth discussions on Africa's biggest stories. Follow us on social media at Africa Briefing Podcast and stay informed on the latest developments shaping